In a world of EMS podcasts, EMS Office Hours is the only live podcast for EMTs and paramedics, transmitting the latest EMS news, trends, and topics. Turn down your scanners and turn up your speakers to join Jim Hoffman, Josh Knapp, and Dave Brenner in their latest podcasting journey.
The other topic that I wanted to bring up today kind of goes into that. I saw this this post on Twitter. I'm going to put the image up here just so the video element here.
Yeah. When you sent me the picture, I remember it coming across my feed as well.
Yeah.
Now,
and it's I don't know if anyone follows Twitter, but there's a New York City EMS Watch a user on there who focuses mainly on FDNY EMS, and he puts a picture of a patient on a stretcher, and there's a lot going on there, and there's a cop that's ventilating the patient, with it, and of course the comment is, EMS works best when the paramedic or the EMT secures the airway and ventilates the patient, not the police officer. And I understand the the sentiment with that, right? Because of the fact that is the way it's supposed to be. But I know, like even for myself, there have been calls that I've been on over the years that when you're shorthanded, you end up delegating skills and delegating things to other people that might not necessarily be as trained as you would like them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the picture, I mean, you can tell he's not really doing that great of a mask seal from what you can look at on the images. It doesn't look that great of a mask seal going on. But you have to say, well, what were the two EMTs doing at the time?
One of my points to counter that, in all fairness, from the height that you have that stretcher,
that's another thing.
Could you get a good seal? You can't blame, again, don't blame the cop.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely not. Yeah.
No. And again, just let's go full disclosure, since we're going to be out there for a lot of people. I'm retired NYPD. I've also worked as a volunteer firefighter and fire medic, and I've been a paramedic for a million years. So that being said, I'm not defending the cop because I work for the NYPD. I'm just saying, let's take a look at the totality of the situation. And in this particular case, even if you had an EMT or a medic standing there, unless they're like 7 foot at that height, stretcher height, you're not going to be able to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Seal.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just what I'm trying to think of is I wonder how many people out there end up delegating certain things to people because of the fact that you don't have enough hands on the scene, and you're trying to do a lot of different things, and sometimes maybe your hands would be better off doing a skill like this and letting the cop that isn't as trained carry the bags, you know what I mean? Or get to the ambulance.
The situation. I know in New York City, we're resource rich.
Yes.
You think about places out in the Midwest where you might have literally one medic for 4 counties. And I've read of accounts where that is the fact.
Yeah.
That on duty, you might have 4 medics for that 4-county area, but only one medic at any given time is actually working.
Mm-hmm.
So part of incident command and part of leadership and management is anything that you could delegate that somebody else could do, you should always delegate. And the only thing you should have to do is what only you can do. So let's say in that particular case, first things first is in the NYPD, you have the emergency service unit. They're all trained as EMTs at a minimum, but some of them are RNs, some of them are medics, and some of them are PAs and actively working. When you build your network and you build these relationships, as all good leaders do, you know your people.
Mm-hmm.
That snapshot, we don't know that the EMTs and that medic, that cop could very well still be an active EMT or medic in the field working part-time off duty. So his skills are still up and he's able to do that.
But now what about like the liability on that though, which I think is what when I read a lot of the comments associated with that post, is everyone not necessarily like you're saying getting on the cop for it, because he's there and maybe he's an EMT or he's maybe just a CFR,
Yeah.
right? And people not necessarily getting on the cop, but people more getting on the EMTs or the medics that were there, saying that they're putting themselves up as a liability. So if there's a negative outcome to the patient, and
So now let me
a
ask you
supervisor
that.
sees that picture, right, and then starts going, "Well, you weren't bagging the patient effectively, and that's why he died, and now you're jammed up because of that."
Well, let's take a look at that situation. And I'm just going to be throwing in a lot of variables to make my point work because we don't know exactly the
Yeah,
circumstances
this is a
of that situation.
snapshot of a
But
scene.
it looks like a bad trauma situation, so I'm just going to build on that. Let's have it's in the city. You're riding double medic, which is what an ALS unit is. And it's just you and your partner because it's probably 5:30, 6 o'clock, hot July. Well, he's wearing a jacket, so it's not July. But it's a situation where it's just you and your partner. Your BLS that was coming with you got diverted to another job in the area because it's a busy area that you're working in. So now you're on scene. You have a bad trauma, multiple systems trauma, and it's just you and your partner. So now your partner is attempting to start an IV or an IO on the patient while you're trying to do a needle decompression and or maybe stabilize the patient on the backboard because I believe there were head blocks in that situation. So you have them backboarded. And who's bagging while your partner's starting the line and or maybe you're stabilizing on the backboard or trying to get the needle decompression for doing the chest decompression, getting the needles out of your bag. You've got a lot of stuff that's going on simultaneously. You got to give up something. So if you're going to be a purist in terms of liability and the only people touching the patient should be our agency people that have been trained and certified, how much liability do you have not using if they go to court and that cop who has to obviously do a report since he's involved goes and testifies, well, what did you do? Or or Officer Jones, aren't you a certified paramedic in the state of New York? Yes. Why did you not help the EMS crew that was there on scene? They wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
When there are various variables out there, liability is a lot of different things. There's always the omission and the commission. Whether you do something or you don't do something that puts you at liability. Not using all the resources you have available to you can be a liability. I'll go with an example I had this summer. Up by where I am, 17A is a windy road through the mountains. And a lot of people love to go over the hills and around the curves with their motorcycles. There was a incident in the area where traffic slowed down, and this guy came not only up and over, but on a curve. So it was a double whammy for him and couldn't stop in time with the traffic that was ahead. And he ended up dumping his bike and multiple long bone fractures and bleeding and stuff like that was going on. In my area, I was the first medic on the scene and the first responder that was on the scene. There was civilians that had stopped and gotten out of their cars. One was an off-duty firefighter who was also a CFR. There was another off-duty EMT, and there was an off-duty nurse. When I arrived on scene, these 3 individuals were already attending to the person, and the off-duty EMT happened to have a jump bag with him. So he had some like small splints and bandages and dressings that he was utilizing, and he had taken a C-collar out. So I get on the scene. The first thing that I do is I thank everybody for helping them, but I say, okay, who are you and what do you know? Who are you? What do you? And I asked all 3 of them, which is how I got to find out that we had a CFR, an EMT, and a nurse. And that the CFR firefighter was married to the nurse. So it was kind of like a husband and wife helping out there in that spirit of taking care of others. So them plus the EMT were stabilizing the patient while I'm there. Am I now, as a medic who just showed up, haven't gotten my bags out because I want to assess the scene and see what I need and be able to put over a radio report to my incoming BLS and or put the medevac on standby, which is what we did do with this individual. Am I supposed to tell the 3 of them, stop holding his head,
Right.
stop putting pressure on that wound, stop dressing that one, go away, you're not certified or you're not on duty?
Yeah, I'm in charge. I'm here now. You can
What
leave.
liability is that to take people that are giving care and turning it over? They're actually performing care and turning it over. Just like we're performing care under the doctor's license when we're in the field. We're not autonomous. We're not doing it because we're gods. We're doing it because we're practicing under their license. So in this particular situation where we have a real bad trauma patient, we were able to continue stabilizing him. And I was now able to start an IV. Why? Even though the nurse could start IVs, she doesn't have the equipment and she's not on duty in a hospital where she's sanctioned to do it there.
Yeah.
I'm in the field. I'm now able to start an IV because I've got other people doing it. I'm still watching what they're doing. I'm still maintaining what they're doing. I still document. And that's another key point in terms of liability is your documentation.
Yeah.
Are you documenting accurately who did what, how you found it? Because if it wasn't for these other individuals keeping the guy from flailing in pain and having his bone ends grind some more and create more bleeding and damage, they were stabilizing the leg. They were keeping the C-spine in line and performing it so that I could then get to my points of starting an IV, getting them on the backboard, and being able to get that going back full circle with get that monitor on.
It's funny. The whole thing of the documentation is, and I mean, I've been guilty of this where I've had many people on the scene helping with patient care and stuff like that, and I don't document, or I didn't document that who was there and who was doing what. Mm-hmm. Back in the day when you had a lot of the written EMS charts, there were multiple spaces to put other people's names and state certification numbers there, so you can say, oh, this person was on the scene, he was an EMT, this is his number, you know. And you know, nowadays it's hard. I mean, the last time when I was looking at some of the e-charts out there, they don't really have a lot of areas for that because the e-chart is based upon the agency you're working for. Yeah. So if you try to put somebody else's card number in there or shield number or whatever, it's not recognized.
It's valid.
You know, so you end up having to, you know, write it in to, you know, fulfill that you know, that part of the documentation. You know, it's funny you talk about the purest end of it, and that is something that I see way too often, especially online. And you know, I like to call it the Monday morning quarterback type thing, where people see it and go, well, if it was my scene, I wouldn't let no one touches the patient but me and my partner, you know, that type of stuff. But when you're on a scene and you've got the extra hand and you know, either because you worked with them before or whatever, that this person's an EMT or they're a CFR or a paramedic in another agency.
Yep.
Or you work with them before. I mean, I had a call once where we had a pedestrian struck. The guy was really messed up, and me and my partner, you know, we didn't have a lot of hands, so we went in the back with the patient to the trauma center. And one of the firefighters who actually worked for the agency I was at said, "Listen, I'll drive the ambulance So you and your partner go in the back and do patient care, because the trauma center was a good 45 minutes away where we were at least a half an hour away where we were at. So unfortunately, on the way to the hospital, we get into a wreck. So now we all three of us get in trouble because it was this whole thing of, well, why was he driving the ambulance? He wasn't on duty. He wasn't working in official capacity for the agency, and he shouldn't have been driving one of our vehicles. And I've worked many places where they start, when I first started working there, you could let a policeman or a fireman or another EMT from another agency drive the ambulance, but then all of a sudden, because of some type of insurance thing, it wasn't allowed anymore. I mean, when I worked for the voluntaries in New York City, we would let the FDNY EMT drive the ambulance, or an EMT from another voluntary hospital drive the ambulance, and then the paramedics would be in the back doing patient care.
That's all individualized by the agencies where I am in my area, and it depends. In general, other EMS agency people will be able to kind of go across. Firefighters and EMTs are less likely. I know with me where I am, both the local fire department and local police department will drive my my Tahoe, my first response vehicle. They'll bring it with me if I ask.
Well, yeah, because you're in the ambulance, right? And you got to get the Tahoe to the hospital so you can go back and service after the fact. Always got to somehow get all the way back to the scene to get the get the vehicle. Yeah. So it's funny. Some of the argument is too, well, I would never let a cop or a firefighter drive my ambulance. They don't let me drive the cop car. They don't let me drive the fire truck. Like I said, the whole purist sort of devil's advocate all the time thing going on. Yeah. And this is something that I've always struggled with being in EMS, is the textbook protocol, legalese version of EMS, and then the reality of EMS. Yeah. And I mean, luckily, 30 something years, I've never gotten in trouble. I've never, killed anybody doing anything like that. I've never, ended up in court over anything like that. But I know there probably are many people who have, because they've utilized resources that they had. And, most of the places that I've worked, it is resource heavy. Yeah. There was one or two places where it wasn't, and I would end up bumping heads with management because they said, well, you did this and you did that. And I'm like, well, I can't be in 10 places at once, and it ended up being, that situation where you end up having to use resources and develop policies, or exceptions to policies because of stuff that in reality goes on EMS calls all the time.
Well, that's one of the things that they also, when it comes to the legal system, it's what will a reasonable individual do when you have a jury of your peers. This past spring, I was actually selected and not exempted from sitting on it. So myself, as a active paramedic, as a retired NYPD, and in addition, an NYPD detective as well, the two of us were sitting on this jury. And they wanted us to be reasonable. And I think that's why they probably picked us, was so that we can kind of bring in a balance to the people, the mix that were selected. Mm-hmm. You have your rules, but how do you apply them? And does a reasonable individual see it that way? Like you said, when you're in a resource poor environment, you can't be in 10 places at once.
Right.
You got to try something logical, reasonable, and have a thought process of why you were doing it. I had the police officer drive it because I know that we have trouble with getting ALS coverage in our area. So I wanted to make sure that my vehicle was with me so I could get back in service sooner, rather than have an increased downtime and lack of coverage of ALS in our area, or lack of a BLS unit available in the area. So there has to be some reasonable thought behind it. people are very scared often because of how their insurance policies are written and the riders are, and it varies from agency to agency. There's no standard. So you can't say, well, this agency lets cops drive it, so I let a cop drive ours. Well, our insurance doesn't cover it; theirs does.
Yeah.
Just like in our area, we have volunteer agencies where the EMTs respond from home. Some agencies have very expensive policies and riders, so that if you leave your house and get into an accident coming out of your driveway, you're covered because their policy covers it. Other volunteer agencies going with a lesser or cheaper policy because they can't afford it or don't want to afford it because they're being penny wise and pound foolish. You're going to have them say, well, you weren't in the building in an authorized vehicle, so we're not covering your accident.
Yeah.
So you have to know what you're dealing with and where you are, and it varies.
Yeah. Mike, I don't want to go on. I mean, we could talk about this stuff for hours, man. Honestly, it really just kind of scratched the surface in the 45 minutes or so we've been speaking. I think one of the big takeaways for today is, know your documentation, right? And that kind of covers you with that. And then with that, that's a CME all in of itself that isn't addressed often enough.